Just want to make
Hi,
sure.
I'm here.
Hey, wonderful. I'm glad you could make it. We've been holding for you because we didn't have a quorum, but now
Oh, no.
get going.
Sorry.
So I'm going to start with the script, and we'll do some attendance and read some stuff, and then off we'll go into the agenda. As a preliminary matter, this is Ted Barker Hook, Zoning Advisory Committee Chair. Permit me to confirm that all members are present and can hear me. Please respond with present when I call your name. Mary Larson Marlowe, no. Ron Foisey.
Present.
Arnold Cohen, no. Nisha, no. Madhu.
Present.
Rachel Rawson, no. Elise.
Present.
Curtis Smithson.
Present.
And staff, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. John Gelsich.
Present.
Excellent. Good evening. This open meeting of the Zoning Advisory Committee is being conducted remotely, consistent with an act extending certain COVID-19 measures adopted during the state of emergency. This act includes an extension until, but I think now it's beyond, this is an old script, March 31st, 2023. What's the extension now, John? Do you know?
Want to say 25, but I'm not sure. I think they've got like 2 years. It's a while.
I think that's right.
Until sometime in 2025. First, the new law allows public bodies to continue providing live, adequate alternative means of public access to the deliberations of the public body instead of holding meetings in a public place that is open and physically accessible to the public. Adequate alternative means may include, without limitation, providing public access through telephone, internet, or satellite-enabled audio or video conferencing, or any other technology that enables the public to clearly follow the proceedings of the public body in real time. Second, the new law authorizes all members of a public body to continue participating in meetings remotely. The open meeting law's requirement that a quorum of the body and the chair be physically present at the meeting location remains suspended. For this meeting, the Zoning Advisory Committee is convening by video conference via Zoom app as posted on the town's web meeting calendar and the ZAC agenda identifying how the public may join. Additionally, the meeting may be broadcast by HCAM through one or many of its channels or platforms. Please note that this meeting is being recorded and that some attendees are participating by video conference. Accordingly, please be aware that others may be able to see you and take care not to screen share your computer. Anything that you broadcast may be captured by the recording. Additionally, it might be wise to mute yourself when you are not talking to make the meeting easier to run and to make sure that nothing accidentally goes out over the airwaves. We do have a meeting agenda, and I'm going to shuffle it a little bit, but not as much as I originally had planned to. I like getting the minutes out of the way first. Committee members, Zoning Advisory Committee members, were you able to read the minutes of February 13th? And does anybody have any changes or objections?
Didn't see any problems.
It looks like a no. I would love a motion to accept the minutes of February 13th, 2023.
So moved.
And a second.
Second.
We need to do this by roll call vote because we're remote. Ted is an aye. Ron?
Aye.
Madhu?
Aye.
Elise?
Aye.
And Curtis.
Aye.
Wonderful. Our agenda has, for number one, renewable energy requirements for new construction. We are going to start with that at this point. And then we're going to go to a restart of tree protection. And then finally, John's going to give us an update on the MBTA communities new law. I'm happy that we have members of the Sustainable Green Committee here, and they're going to help us out with thinking through renewable energy requirements for new construction. And I believe that Nicole Simpson has a slideshow presentation that'll be helpful to us that she'd like to share. The floor is yours, Nicole, assuming John gave you that power.
Not yet. So John, if you can enable sharing for me.
All set.
Okay. All right, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Great. Let me just adjust the, sorry, I'm somehow working with 3 monitors here in the office. So I just want to get my view set so I can still see you guys. So thanks for having us and welcoming us to the meeting. I'm Nicole Simpson. I'm a member of the Sustainable Green Committee. Jeff Rowland and where is it? Sorry, I don't have my full view, but Paul Gallagher are also part of the committee. We are a subgroup that's working on climate action and buildings. And so this ties in with the work that we've been doing. And so we wanted to talk a little bit about the specialized stretch code, which we are hoping to bring to the special town meeting planned in November. And I think it's a really good complement to the work that I know you guys wanted to focus on this year related to renewable energy. This is a way of getting at that using a code written by the state for town adoption. So I'll talk through that a little bit. So for anybody who attended the May annual town meeting, we brought forward a net zero resolution with a date of 2045, and that did pass at town meeting. And so this policy would, or this new stretch code would fit in with the objectives of this, of lowering our emissions as a town and working towards that net zero goal in the future. So this is a really important way to get at that. If you look, Paul put this together, if you look at our residential buildings, and commercial buildings are also going to be relevant to this, but residential buildings are 27.7% per, I forget what year we were using for this, but that percent of our emissions. And so a lot of that comes from heating using gas or oil. So that's a big portion of it. But any fossil fuel use at home would be contributing to this building's emissions. One more thing I wanted to note with this net zero resolution. So as we were chit-chatting earlier and talking about different things, I heard it mentioned extreme heat, stronger storms, and I'm in Minnesota right now for work, and it's smoky here. We've got some wildfire smoke, so we're feeling the impacts of climate change right now, and it's only going to continue to get worse. And so that's why these net zero resolutions set forward by the nation, by the state, and now by our town as well, are so important for addressing the root cause and shifting so that we can reduce the impacts of climate change. So that's why it's an area of passion for me and many other people in this committee. So there are 3 levels of building codes in Massachusetts. There's the base energy code. So that's what you would have in a town if you didn't make any decisions to opt into one of the other options. There's the stretch code that's been around for a long time, since 2010 or around that time. 299 communities are a part of that. And we in Hopkinton adopted that in our 2010 town meeting for taking effect January 1st, 2011. There were 40 towns at that time who adopted it. And so that number has continued to grow. So I've seen 299, 300 out of about 350 communities. It just recently updated. I think this may have been the 3rd update to it. So January 1st, a new version took effect, which again is moving in the direction of reaching the state's net zero goals. And so stronger energy efficiency, building efficiency requirements. It was a little bit abrupt, the adoption of this. It took effect January 1st. The text of it was still being finalized throughout the fall. So I know that was a bit of a challenge. but we are currently in the latest version of the stretch code. The specialized stretch code is really what is going to take that next step forward towards getting to net zero. And this is applying to new construction in towns and cities that vote to opt in. So we have to, as a town meeting, decide to adopt this stretch code. And you're recommended to adopt it 6 to 11 months after you vote on it. So if we bring this forward in November, the recommended adoption is January 1st or July 1st. So we would be looking at a July 1st, 2024 adoption. If we waited till our annual town meeting, then we would be looking at January 1st, 2025. So we really would love to take this opportunity of adopting it sooner so it can start taking effect in town. But with that warning, it would give plenty of time for our town employees, our inspectors, to familiarize with the code. And so that we would be able to enforce that in the town. All right, so I grabbed a lot of these slides from information put out by the state, and we can, and I'm not an expert on this. I've learned by just reading through it and studying it. And Jeff and Paul, please be sure to jump in if I'm missing anything. So this is kind of the key change. Let me describe one more thing. So there's the stretch code, and then the specialized stretch code is basically adopting two, are they called amendments to it or appendices to it for residential and commercial. So looking at residential, there are 3 ways to comply with this code. You can build an all-electric home. So that means that there is no gas or oil connection with the home. So, and then the HERS rating, and HERS is the home energy rating system, has level 45 category for that. So referring to a more insulated and energy efficient home. Or a passive house is another way of achieving that. There's the mixed fuel option. So that enables you to still have that fossil fuel connection, but you have to still be wired for electric. So to be able to get to that all electric home without any more wiring work done, but it doesn't prevent you from initially or utilizing if you wanted gas heating or gas stove. And so, but to do that, you are required to follow a more stringent HERS rating of 42. And then the third pathway is zero energy. And that would be having solar to offset the energy usage in order to get to a HERS 0. When you have a larger home that's 4,000 square feet or larger, you must use the all-electric pathway or the zero energy pathway. There's not the option for mixed fuel. For additions to a home, there is nothing special that comes in the specialized stretch code. That is already covered under the stretch code that we follow today. So this isn't adding any new requirements in that area.
Nicole, before we leave that slide, may I ask for 2 clarifications?
Sure.
What is a passive house? And can you help me with the HERS rating a little bit more? Apparently a lower number is more green. Can you help me with those 2 things?
Yep, correct. So I have on another screen here a glossary that
Sorry.
no, that's fine. I can describe both of those. So a passive house, it defines as passive house is highly efficient, a highly energy efficient building. Some of the principles of passive house design are superior windows, mechanical ventilation with heat recovery, quality insulation, and airtight construction. So it's a way to comply with this code. And so I think that's, I don't know if somebody is an expert on this, please feel free to speak up. Because like I said, I learned this from reading all of this, but I think it's kind of similar to the HERS rating, but a different way of complying and having that energy efficient home. So HERS is a home energy rating system where the lower score is better. The higher the score, the worse the energy performance. And I believe it's on another slide in here that the average right now in Massachusetts is 51.
Okay.
But this might, I think the next couple of slides will clarify that more.
As long as I interrupted, I think Elise has her hand up.
Yeah, can I ask a question to Nicole?
Sure.
The additions and alterations, does that mean if someone has a 3,700 square foot house and then they put on an addition and make it over 4,000, they do not have to be all electric? Is that what you mean by same as stretch code?
That's my understanding. When it's an existing structure and they're putting on an addition, there are requirements around that with the stretch code. But by adopting the specialized stretch code, we're not putting any new requirements on that. So the 4,000 square foot applies to a new construction. And the addition, I think, is related to 1,000 square feet or larger addition.
Okay. All right, thanks.
Yep.
Yeah, there are specific rules around additions that either has to be like a certain percentage of the building or over 1,000 square feet to qualify for certain parts of the code. I'm sure there's some table somewhere that explains it in detail, but we don't have it memorized.
Thanks.
Okay, so this may be what you were interested in. I think this hopefully will help clarify it. I know it's a lot to look at initially. I believe so per the stretch code prior to the January 1st change, these were the levels required. Again, mixed fuel is allowing for a gas hookup to the home, for example. Mixed fuel plus solar. I think what that's saying is you could be less efficient but make up for it with solar. So you could kind of start with a less good rating, but you're offsetting to some extent with by having solar. All electric had that same number, and then all electric plus solar had an allowance beyond that. January 1st, on January 1st, that tightened up. And so all of those numbers went down. So this is what we have right now in Hopkinton. With the stretch code, so if we didn't adopt the specialized stretch code and we just stayed with the current stretch code, these numbers are going to apply to us July 1st, 2024, either way. So that's incrementing with the stretch code. It's becoming tighter restrictions July 1st. And so we're going to get that whether we adopt specialized code or not. If we adopted the specialized code, there's many towns, which I'll get to later, that are adopting it either July 1st this year or January 1st of next year. They're grabbing these new numbers sooner by taking on the specialized code. But since we would be at the earliest July 1st next year, this really makes no difference, that aspect of it. Make sense? Okay. And then this is just kind of a reference of some older homes might have a rating over 100. In Massachusetts, the average, and you could take into consideration the building code set most of the towns have had, probably put it here, are at 51. So this is kind of moving us further in that direction of having energy efficient homes. And so I would expect the average will have to move down as 300 towns adopt these numbers next July. And then this is just for reference. Again, this is the stretch code and not the specialized stretch code. to that question about additions and alterations, the numbers are a little bit different. And so there's what changed in on January 1st, and I believe there is no further change coming for additions that we know of with the current code. Okay. This touches on some of the incentives. There are, of course, concerns, are all electric homes more expensive? So a key component of that would be a heat pump. A heat pump is electric powered, highly efficient a way of heating a home, but it's also a way of cooling the home. So you wouldn't install both an AC and a furnace. The heat pump does both. So those can sometimes have a high upfront cost. They also qualify for a lot of rebates, which offset the cost. And it's one thing rather than two, the AC and the furnace. And then for the HERS ratings, there's also these other incentives from Mass Save. And then the Federal Inflation Reduction Act also has credits for complying with some of these standards. So the cost, and there's another example I can show if we want to dig into that more, but there are ways of saving money where ultimately an all electric home or building does not have to be more expensive. I think you may find actually, if you're taking that mixed use pathway, that may be where you see more expensive because you're required to do all that pre-wiring for an all electric home, plus the expenses of hooking up a gas line. And so if anybody chooses to pursue that mixed fuel, that's where you may see the higher costs to kind of have it both ways. So this also applies to multifamily housing and requires a passive house for 5 stories or less, if over 12,000 square feet. And it would be for all multifamily residents over, so for, January 2024, the rules changed to be passive house required for all residential over 12,000 square feet. So I don't really have a lot more detail in here. We'd have to dig into the code more on this. I don't know if there were other slides. So excuse us being a little bit blurry. I grabbed this from a video presentation, I think was done in Arlington. But it summarizes what's really unique about the specialized code. So requiring the pre-wiring for electric, because ultimately that's the direction all housing is going to have to go. And the cheapest time to do that is when you're building a home rather than retrofitting later. So requiring that pre-wiring for all electric, even if you're opting to use fossil fuels initially with the home. Including solar is required for buildings that use fossil fuels. So some amount of solar is required for those homes. When you're building a larger home, which would have more emissions due to heating a larger space, there are more requirements that you don't have the option to do the mixed use. You would have to do the zero energy. I think there were 2 pathways for all electric or zero energy. The higher performance for large multifamily, and then getting ahead on the HERS ratings won't apply to us because of our timing. There's also a commercial building aspect to this and 3 pathways for that. So there's all electric, passive house, and then if there's gas or fossil fuel, there is required solar on site where that's feasible, and the electric pre-wiring as well. yeah, so solar is required when you're using fossil fuels or opting for the net zero pathway. It's optional on an all electric building. In reality, I would expect that most people doing all electric buildings would want to add solar to lower the energy costs, because you can offset it's all of your energy usage using solar. You're unable to do that for if you have gas heating. So I think many people with all electric buildings would be incentivized to want to do solar as well, but it wouldn't be required for them to do that. So we already talked about some of this. The specialized code doesn't apply to existing structures. Those would be under the stretch code. Will it discourage the creation of affordable housing? No, because of all of the incentives, it will continue to encourage the affordable housing to be built. And the residents would benefit from not the better health quality in the home by not having fossil fuel usage in the home, and the chance to save money on their energy bills, as renewable energy can offset that. Is it possible to install a gas cooktop? Yes, with that mixed fuel pathway, you could continue to do that. It just would not be an option for the homes over 4,000 square feet that have the other compliance requirements. Why should we do this? The pre-wiring is really the key thing of this is our opportunity with these new homes being built to set them up to be all electric in the future, as that's the direction we're going to need to go. For the homeowner, it's going to be the cheapest in the long run, because they won't have to do all that rework in order to switch to electric appliances. And then why are we permitting fossil fuels at all? For now, it preserves the market choice. And so it's not restricted in the current specialized code. So this is a map that's pretty recent, in May, of towns that have already adopted the specialized code. There's 17 so far, mostly in this Middlesex County area here, a couple on the Cape as well. So it's starting to pick up. Our closest neighbor here is Sherburne, has adopted it. So to look at that in a little bit more detail, this is a list of all those towns and the type of government they have. So many of them have open town meeting the way we do. Most are for the January adoption. There were a couple that jumped on it right away, and will be adopting it in a couple days, in July 1st. We would be looking at July of next year. And just for reference population, so we can look to some similar towns, I think Concord and Acton might be good to compare against. Sherburne's smaller, but nearby. And so you can see that other towns like us are choosing to move forward with this. I did include on here, just for reference, Ashland did bring this forward in their town meeting and it did not pass. So it's not a sure thing. And I believe part of the challenge is it's a complex story. It's not straightforward to explain and fully understand what the impacts look like. But we are seeing largely many towns that are bringing this forward, many cities that are bringing it forward are adopting the stretch code. And then other nice thing is, with all these towns coming ahead of us, it kind of gives a chance to work out the details of the training and how to comply and all of that. We would be in that third wave of adoption. So it's kind of nice to see it take effect and learn from that before it's our turn. The state provides a recommended text to use in your town meeting. I have a little bit of figuring out. We have some figuring out to do with this because our current bylaws don't actually include that we follow the stretch code. So it was just adopted at town meeting. And so that is what's covering it and not in our bylaws. So we'll be meeting with Connor later this week to talk about what it might look like to whether we add it to our bylaws or just use the town meeting article to try to adopt this. This text on the bottom wasn't included by the state, but one of the towns that adopted it included it, and I thought it was a helpful explanation. So we could choose to include something like that if it's useful. So thinking about what does this mean for Hopkinton, looking at a growth study that was done a couple of years ago, looking back on the past 20 years, 30 to 40 homes approximately are built per year. That doesn't count legacy farms or the Lumber Street apartment complex. And so if you look at our baseline, I'm not sure that I have the most up-to-date number, but somewhere around 6,600 housing units. If we were 30 to 40 homes per year, what does that look like at 2045, which I picked just because that's our net zero resolution date. And so if we built 30 homes per year, then that would increase the number of housing units that we have by 10%. If we did 40 homes per year, that would be by 13%. If we did 35 homes per year and had 750 MBTA units that were built sometime in the next few years, then that's a 23% increase in new housing units. So it matters adopting it now because we're already in a hole here. We already have emissions from houses. Let's not keep digging. As we build new homes, as we're going to continue to do, we're going to continue to grow as a town. Let's catch these homes when it's the opportunity to have low emissions homes and set them up for the future with that electric wiring to transition if needed. And that's the way that we can make a pretty big impact towards reaching our net zero goals. And I think that's all I have for right now. So yeah, any questions?
I guess maybe I'll open the floor to everybody else for any questions for Nicole first. So just don't worry about raising your hand, just speak up. We don't need formality.
No questions, but I appreciate all the data and the presentation. Thank you so much. It's so cool to learn that we are attempting something which seems manageable, achievable. It doesn't seem overwhelming. It's small steps. We start with new construction, then we take one more step, and
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that's what I really like about this is it's not us inventing our own bylaw that could go under legal challenge, or are we missing something that we're not thinking of? This is a roadmap for us. It's already written. They even give us the text to put in an article. There is a lot of steps along the way that would help us be moving towards more renewable energy on homes, less emissions coming from homes. And it's not us trying to create something that's beyond some of our expertise. I wouldn't really know where to start with how to write it.
Yeah, I think we'd had a discussion in the past couple of meetings about requiring homes that were constructed to be solar ready, and it looks like the stretch code does require that. So there's really nothing that we would need to do if the stretch code's adopted. Well, I guess stretch code is adopted now, but I think I did read in there is requirement for, a path for solar from the roof. You have to stub something out to the roof to be able to get solar added in the future without having to rip everything apart. So kind of achieved one of the goals we were looking at. Has already been touched on.
Elise, I saw your hand pop up, and I wonder if you have a reaction to what Curtis said as well.
I more had a question for John.
Oh, okay.
So if we took this to town meeting and it was approved, we wouldn't really need to do anything from a zoning standpoint anymore, right? Because this would just cover the general bylaws of the town.
That was the question I was holding on to as well.
So, yeah, I mean, this would be a building code. So,
Okay.
I think we didn't even adopt the stretch building code via bylaw, just by town meeting vote. So it would be the same process. They would just adopt it by town meeting vote, and that's just what the building code that we would use would be. In terms of changing zoning, no, but there may be zoning changes required to partner with this effort, but nothing would be necessary.
Okay.
Elise, if I could ask you a question, and maybe Nicole, you can chime in. I think the discussions we had before were, should we explore requiring solar panels installed on new constructions? Whereas this is saying essentially solar panel ready and all sorts of other stuff, electric cooktop ready, heat, electric ready. So in some ways, this would be, when it comes to only solar panels, less onerous to builders than what we were kicking around. Is that true?
Yeah. And from what I remember, the trouble we were having before is if we required all new construction to have solar, we were discussing, do we give a percentage of, like, if you're building a community, like 80% of them have to be solar, have solar panels. And then there's all sorts of, issues that I was trying to look up the legality of it, but I went down a rabbit hole and it was, it got more complicated with everything I looked up. But basically we would just, if we wanted to do that, it would be very aggressive. I'm not saying it's aggressive in the wrong way. I think it's aggressive in the right way, but we would just really have to think about, what we would exempt. And I guess, I don't know, there was just a lot of questions. Like, I think you had mentioned, Ted, what if the roofs are facing the wrong way in some of the houses, like at the end of a street or a certain way, and it's just not possible for the builder to do it. And then there's all sorts of, and who would enforce it? Who would it go through? The planning board? Would it go through ZBA?
Yeah, I think that when I was talking about the roofs, that might have led us to then, well, maybe a percentage of houses, so that the developer could say, this house here, we're envisioning in a way where solar doesn't work, but we have achieved the percentage with these other houses. So yeah, on the one hand, if we're not requiring solar, this would, at least with that aspect, be less onerous. But on the other hand, just requiring solar would seem to push, at minimum, mixed fuel homes, not all electric or zero energy homes. So yeah, I feel like there's a lot of overlap. And I'm not trying to wrap up this discussion. I just have a thought in my head between what the Sustainable Green Committee is talking about for a town meeting in November and what we were talking about. And maybe if this passes in November, what we were talking about would be redundant. If this doesn't pass and we stop talking about requiring solar in some way or another, then we're not going to have time to rev it up again before town meeting. So I think a question for the Zoning Advisory Committee is, do we proceed as if we didn't hear this presentation in case this fails at town meeting, if we believe in where we started talking about before? Does that make sense, what I'm asking the commission, the committee? So I'm open to any thoughts on anything, but especially whether the Zoning Advisory Committee would like to table exploring the idea that Elise brought to us, at least until November, or whether we should keep on going in that direction, even if it may prove to be unnecessary.
And my one comment on that has to do with the vote required at town meeting.
Hmm.
General bylaw is a 50% vote. Is that right, John? And a zoning change would be 2/3. So if town meeting can't get a 50% majority, I think it would be quite a challenge for us to try to get to a 2/3 majority later on. And I'd like to expend our energy. I mean, since this is going the general bylaw route, let's put our energy to other things that would tend to be more productive.
That makes some sense. Other thoughts?
I agree. This seems like making solar mandatory. It's like you guys all brought up. There are different. It could get into problematic territory. Are we encroaching on how big does the house have to be? To how much is the solar allowed and all that stuff? So I would prefer this go ahead first. If this doesn't go ahead, then we start looking at figuring out how to bring solar in, rather than, because it's also an expensive idea. Solar is not cheap yet, so pushing an idea like that, there will be pushback. There will be pushback from the town, so we have to think through it, make sure every area is covered, all the loopholes are covered. So rather, maybe we work on another bylaw for this year and then fall back on that one as a next option.
Okay. Elise, do you have thoughts since this was your initiative initially?
I mean, I kind of agree with the rest of the group. I don't want to have to push it back too much longer, but I feel like, I don't know, I feel like we kind of need to see where the town stands on this before we start pushing something even more aggressive than this. I mean, from what I saw at the last town meeting, people seem to be in favor of green energy and reducing fossil fuels, but that was also just voting on like the idea of getting there. This is something more like a plan of action.
I wonder, I'm aware, Nicole and Jeff and Paul, that if we do decide to continue to pursue alongside you guys, it wouldn't be extra work for you. With that said, what would your thoughts be if you were on the zoning advisory committee? Would you agree with the members that have spoken already and say, let's take a wait and see on the specialized stretch code and see how that goes? What would you hope that we would do?
Personally, I would hope for, like, I agree, like it's expensive to spend your time on developing a plan in parallel, right? With the amount of details that need to go into it. I think what would give this the best chance is if we like had your formal support at town meeting. You know, if Ted or someone else goes up and zoning advisory committee recommends approval. I think that lends a helping hand there. If you do want to continue talking about this, though, I think there are options to even push solar a little bit further. I don't think I can share my screen, but there's like a PDF on a state website that has a nice table showing the options here. And like for dwelling units that are up to 4,000 square feet, so under 4,000 square feet, solar is optional, right? So if you wanted to push the boundaries a little bit, you could say, take that table and say, okay, we're going to do this and, recommend a little bit more for areas where it's still optional. And so then like you could duplicate the work. And then if both happen to, pass, they could then be, merged afterwards.
Cool.
Or wait until, see if this passes and then for the May town meeting, maybe take it a little further.
Maybe if we chose to make it more stringent in where it's applied and what size new construction. That's an interesting thought. Anybody else have thoughts? I think I'm inclined to agree with what everyone said, that I think waiting to see how this goes at town meeting might be the best way forward. As long as we keep thinking about it. And I don't know if anyone, Jeff, cares what Zach has to say. Usually it's the planning board's opinion. But if anyone cares to hear, I would be happy to step up and say that we are in support of, well, I guess I'd want to get a vote from the zoning advisory committee. But if the committee agreed that we're in favor of this, I would be comfortable standing up at town meeting and saying so. Any other thoughts on this agenda item, anybody?
I think if through the stretch code, they are required to have everything except for the panels and the wiring there in place. Maybe once the stretch code is passed, we could go a little further with it as a next step, saying, it's already there. Let's go ahead and make it a requirement for smaller development or smaller buildings. I know the stretch code, we talked about the, areas that couldn't really feasibly put in solar. I think the stretch code has a good bit of information on orientation and shaded areas. And so it would kind of quantify what could and couldn't be done, where we wouldn't have to really take that step. Per the step, per the stretch code, we think that under 4,000 square feet should be required to have solar, or, kind of divide that out once it's a requirement that everything be there solar ready for the stretch code. So maybe it is, see, if this passes, then we could add some more additional requirements to make it, solar required once the stretch code is passed.
It strikes me, and I haven't thought this out, so this may be a moronic thought, but while I am absolutely in favor of all the green initiatives, and I love my 150-year-old house, but I know it's not energy efficient in the least, and I wish it were more so. But it also strikes me that if the specialized stretch code required new homes at 4,000 feet to be dramatically more efficient, that builders might decide that's not the kind of home they want to build if it costs too much initially to build those homes. Perhaps it's cheaper, as Nicole's presentation showed. But if they were reticent to build a bigger home because the specialized stretch code requires many more things, it might push us toward more attainable housing. I think that we've lamented many times how many huge new homes we're getting in these developments, and it's pushing the average price of living in Hopkinton ever higher. If a November specialized stretch code got passed at town meeting, and we chose to move from 4,000 to 3,000 feet, make it more stringent in Hopkinton, it might also have the dual purpose of leading to more attainable housing in new construction. Maybe not. Maybe that is a garbage thought, but it struck me just now and I thought I'd share it. Elise, I see your hand.
Yeah, I have a question for Nicole or Jeff, since you guys seem to have done a lot more research on this new stretch code. So the wording that's there is sort of like an example to take to town meeting, but could you take that wording and just change the 4,000 to a different number before it goes to town meeting? Or does it have to be this stretch code from Massachusetts?
I think we would want to say, so I believe this 225 CMR 22 and 23, that part's the stretch code, which we've already got. Appendices RC and CC, that's the new part that we're incorporating here. I think we would still want to say that to just clearly state we're taking the state's code, so we would have any future changes to it, that we're adopting that. But I wonder if we could do some amendment to it.
Yeah, we're including appendices RC and CC, including future, all the way until the end of the sentence, and then say, however, with the exception of changing like this number in paragraph whatever, and then citing. Like say, we're including these and then refer to them, but then say, with the exception of changing this number to this number.
I mean, I think we want to bring it to town council for legal review and make sure that's okay. I also worry a little bit of, would that hurt our chances of it passing? Is there any risk of that?
Away.
I don't know. I'm not sure how much that would impact things. Also, if we make very clear, this is about new construction, most people in town, this would not apply to them. This is for, would be for new houses being built.
Yeah, I agree. I think changing some of the numbers would complicate an already very complicated discussion. I think it's going to be tough. I think we get 5 minutes at town meeting to explain our article. So yeah, we're going to be pressed for time to, boil this down into something that's manageable.
I think so too. I think by pitching it to say this is what was it, 11 other communities have already done. We are not the groundbreakers here. We're just following what the state recommends, makes it an easier sell. And then if we chose to, the Sustainable Green Committee and or Zoning Advisory Committee down the road further to make it tighter, we could, but I don't think that's a good target for now. Any other thoughts? I don't think I see any. So we're going to move, unless there's an objection, to the next agenda item, to the Sustainable Green Committee members. Again, you are more than welcome to stay. We're going to try to restart our tree protection discussion from a couple of years ago. We'll see where it goes. This is only meant to be a restart. I have 0 proposals for a new bylaw for tree protection. I just want to get the discussion kind of formally going again. And I'm going to have some help with this. But what I put together first, and I will try not to be too wordy, but I'm often not good at that when that's my goal, is I put together a little how did we get where we are now kind of story. I was thinking of Arnold, who wasn't with us when we went through this before. I'm thinking of our millions of viewers on HCAM as well. But also, I don't know if the Sustainable Green Committee knows where we were. So we first began talking about trees when in 2019, we were having a lot of commercial solar development in town. And the Zoning Advisory Committee's first attempt to try to get some control around that was a solar overlay on the zoning map. Town council advised us that it probably would not pass a challenge in the courts. And so we said, okay, we'll listen to you. And the planning board also didn't then endorse it. Nonetheless, the overlay came up at town meeting. It was the one we had, was it October outdoors in 2020? August, October? It did come up at town meeting and it got more support than I thought it would have. But the overlay failed. In the Zoning Advisory Committee, we then said, but we're not ready to just say, I guess we're going to have to let the commercial solar come in a kind of Wild West way that it seemed to be happening. So we adopted a 2-pronged approach. And the first was to tighten up our bylaws concerning developing of commercial solar. And we put together, with lots of help from John, a bylaw with many more restrictions and regulations and expectations for any company that wanted to put solar farm in town. And that passed at town meeting in 2021. While we were doing that, we were also looking at a different way to go about tree protection. And we put together something, I couldn't find it, John. I was looking for, in all sorts of places, our initial passed along to the planning board tree protection bylaw. And I wonder if, for the committee members for the future, if you could dig that up and put that in an email or at least in the materials for our next meeting, so that we can have kind of historical reference to what that was. You don't need to find it now if you don't want, but if you'll just kind of put that on a to-do list.
Yep, I can share it.
Anyway, that plan, we explored different ways to try to control clear cutting, essentially. Our real concern was clear cutting. And I don't remember who introduced it, but we started wrestling with this idea called basal area as a way to measure tree loss, as opposed to just counting how many trees are going away or canopy area that was going away. And the bylaw we put together included some sort of measurement of basal area with trees. I think that was one of our problems because From what we learned, that's used mostly with forest management and not tree protection. And I think right away for a lot of people, there was a knee-jerk reaction that said, that's not what basal area is supposed to be used for, so you shouldn't do it. My own take is just because it hasn't been used for that doesn't mean it shouldn't be used for that. And I think it's worth still exploring basal area as a way to talk about tree protection. But in any case, that was one hiccup we ran into. The other one, which I completely own, is we were essentially guessing at percentages of removal of trees in different zoning districts in town. 80% could be removed for commercial, 50% could be removed in the agriculture, different things. And the truth is, we were really kind of guessing. I think Curtis went into his backyard and counted up trees and tried to get a sense what those percentages would mean. But the planning board said, and different groups came to the planning board meeting and said, where are these numbers coming from? And I think that was a legitimate critique. And it was a good reason to say maybe this bylaw is not ready for town meeting, and planning board did not push it forward. And I think that made sense. One critique the planning board got, but it's also kind of aimed at us, is this came out of nowhere. That critique I don't accept. We were talking about this for years. It was in agendas for a year and a half. It was in our agenda for a year and a half. Nonetheless, that bylaw kind of came together in a rush at the end. And I think it was wise to pull it back. And then since then, we've kind of let it sit. We kind of let tensions die down a little bit. But I certainly got the sense that the town doesn't want us to abandon it, that the town does want to see tree protection, not just for solar farms, but for residential development, for anything that is leading to massive clear cutting. I think there's real concern for that in town. I've certainly got that message from different people in different boards in town and a handful of neighbors I talk to out here. So I think it is worth us picking it up again and seeing what, if anything, we can do with it. So that's the history. And now we get to next steps. And in a moment, I'm going to stop talking and let some other people talk. But I think we got to do a couple things if this is something we want to take up again. And I think it is something that a lot of us want to take up again. We need to make clear what our goals are for this. It's bigger than just commercial solar development. It's protecting our natural environment. It's saving the trees that we have in town from massive clear cutting that then don't get replaced very much because a tree in a backyard can be an inconvenience to a new homeowner. So I think we need to make clear our goals. Although I still think that commercial development is a specter overhanging us. I think if any of you have been down Marshall Street in Holliston and seen the new development there, it's really appalling and upsetting and disappointing. If you haven't been down Marshall Street just before the turkey farm as you head out of town, please go check it out. And then here in Hopkinton, more recently, what was going on down at Kimball Street, where, and John, if I get any important part of the story wrong, please fix it, but a firm who wanted to develop commercial solar saw our new bylaw, found a way to bypass the bylaw by going to the planning board and saying, oh no, we're going to put in a subdivision when they had no intention of ever doing that. And somehow that got them around our new solar bylaw. And then the trees came down just recently, and hopefully you read the news about that. So I think the solar specter is still there above us, although I don't think that's certainly not my only concern with this. I did look into, and John, this is the other small bit of homework I wonder if you could help out with. With Curtis's help, I went to the Commonwealth's website, and I'm going to hold this up to you. In spring of 2021, they published a guide to local tree bylaws for communities in Massachusetts. And I think this can be helpful to us. And if John, if you could find a way to send a link out or that out to everybody, it could be helpful. What they don't go into is legal ramifications of different things, whether, for example, basal area is a way that you can protect trees, whether an overlay is going to work. But it does give helpful suggestions. These are what some towns have done. These are ways to phrase different things. And one of the earliest ones says, make sure that your bylaw, and we've done this with other bylaws, states their purpose. I just wanted to share with you one example. It comes from Cambridge, who put together a tree protection bylaw. And as part of the purpose, they wrote that trees, and now I'm quoting, serve a wide variety of functions which promote the health, safety, and welfare of residents. These functions include conserving energy by providing shade and evaporative cooling through transpiration, improving local and global air quality by absorbing carbon dioxide and ozone, reducing wind speed and directing airflow, reducing noise pollution, providing habitat for birds, small mammals, other wildlife, reducing storm runoff, we've talked about the storms, and potential for soil erosion, increasing real property values, and enhancing visual and aesthetic qualities that attract visitors and businesses. I think that is a broader understanding of why tree protection is important than simply we don't want a wild west of solar development in town. And I think if we follow that, it could be helpful. I also went to the town vision statement, which was adopted in 2015. And a couple bullets at the end is that we, the town of Hopkinton, promotes sustainability and energy conservation through our town's plans, actions, and public investments to maintain Hopkinton's status as a green community leader. By the way, an important bullet for our first agenda item tonight. And we in Hopkinton protect open spaces and natural resources, build upon the town's history and cultural heritage, and treasure our beautiful and special places as they define our community identity and character. I think as we go forward, if we keep those vision statement goals in mind, that also helps us build a bylaw and build a presentation that can win supporters, because we've agreed that this is what Hopkinton stands for and want to go forward with. The Board of Selectmen in 2015, or the board, I guess they were the Board of Selectmen then, the Select Board agreed to that in 2015. Finally, I think what we need to do as we move forward in a serious way is reach out and include input from other voices. While again, I know that all of our agendas are made public and we were hiding nothing from anybody, we heard pretty loud voices that said, you sprung this on us out of nowhere, and how come you didn't ask us for input? And I kind of accept that critique. We didn't actively reach out for input from some other parts of town, developers in town, or the tree companies in town, et cetera. And I think if we do that better, we can come up with a bylaw that can be more acceptable to the town and serve everybody's needs. So that's what I put together to get us started. I'm going to ask if Curtis will help us out. Curtis put together the last time we began talking about this kind of this is what other towns have done with regard to tree protection. And I think we could learn a little bit from them, but also sometimes they're moving in a direction that isn't necessarily what I think we've talked about for us. So I'm going to be quiet for a bit and let Curtis take over.
Okay. Yeah, I had been trying to contact the DCR Urban Forestry, and we finally managed to get something last day or two. They had a list on their website of communities that have tree protection ordinances. There were what, maybe 20, maybe 24, and all but 5 of them only addressed trees on public land. Concord, Newton, Lexington, Wellesley, and Cambridge all had similar ordinances to, I think, what we're kind of talking about, trying to reduce or protect what is on private property, mainly to be developed in the future. I put this kind of little spreadsheet together, kind of comparing the 3 or the 4. I didn't realize at the time that Cambridge had one. That was the addition that popped up in the DCR website. But I don't know if John still has this, but maybe we can include that in what we send out when we get our original ordinance. We can send this, or draft ordinance, can send this out also, and maybe the link to some of the other, or what the DCR Urban Forestry had sent, is people can kind of look into. But basically, I looked at between the four, Concord, Newton, Lexington, and Wellesley, trees protected. They were all on private property within the municipal boundaries. Who determines applicability? The state requires, in reading some of the stuff that DCR sent, there are state laws requiring that each municipality have a tree warden. And in two cases, Newton and Lexington, the tree warden in Lexington actually has a tree committee that will look at the ordinance requirements. Concord and Wellesley, the building department, looked at what was applicable for this ordinance to be kicked in. The triggers that started the bylaw kind of varied, but it was basically new construction. Lexington went as far as any proposed cutting of any kind of tree that was in the public way or a private road, and demo of residential and non-residential structures. Beyond new construction, there was some that had to do with remodeling. Protected trees, what they defined as a protected tree, went from 6-inch, anything over 6 inches at diameter breast height, which is basically chest height. They measured the trees. 8-inch. One of them had residential 10-inch. So there were kind of 6 to 10 inches on what was considered a protected tree. Let's see. All of them did require a permit or a certificate of exemption. If the bylaw was triggered, then you either had to get a permit or you had to get an exemption certificate filled out. And I guess they would be reviewed by whoever the reviewing authority was, be it the tree warden or the building inspections department. Some of them had exemptions to the bylaw. See, I'll just go with, Newton. For dwellings up to 4 families were exempt, so multifamily. And if you'd owned a lot continuously for 90 days, or remained occupied as a dwelling for 18 consecutive months, or was owned by the same person for 18 consecutive months. So that would kind of make it where the solar farm couldn't come in, buy a lot, and then immediately start tearing things down. In Wellesley, it looks like their subdivisions regulated by planning board, large house review by the planning board, areas under wetland protection committee jurisdiction, and then public, anything on public land. So it sounded like their subdivision regulations may have also had some tree protection requirements. All 4 communities required a mitigation plan if you were going to remove trees, and a protection plan for protecting whatever was to remain was also required by, I guess, 3 out of the 4. The mitigation that was required varied in the different towns also. One was half-inch caliper per 1 inch of caliper removed, with a minimum of 2-inch tree going in. So basically a half to 1. So if you took out a 12-inch tree, you needed to supply at least 6 inches of caliper, 3 2-inch trees, or a 4-inch and a 2-inch or whatever to equal it out. Evergreens, they looked at replacement with height rather than trunk diameter. One of them had, whatever number of inches of caliper that you removed, you had to replace it in kind. Most of them had a payment in lieu. They had different formulas for how that was determined. And they had tree replacement funds that if you went in, took trees out, you would pay into a town fund, which would go use those funds to try to reestablish plantings elsewhere. Like I say, there's different mitigation equations for the different communities. Activities not requiring a permit were basically pruning, emergency situations, and anything that was considered hazardous. If you had a tree that was rotting or damaged by lightning or whatever hanging over a road, you could take it out without seeking a permit. Tree replacement funds, they were kind of all over. One, the replacement cost is determined by the tree warden. And the other, let's see, what was that? Concord required $375 per inch of caliper that was removed if you didn't replace it. Lexington was $200 per inch removed, and Wellesley had a sliding scale depending on the size of the tree. All required an inspection, and most required a bond to be put together, and they all had the option for fines being levied if things weren't followed. I guess we need to kind of take a look at the different ones that have been passed and are now in place, and kind of decide what we might want to model after. And there are, I think there's a Cape Cod. Cape Cod has just basically a template that includes every possible option that you could go in and cross out what you didn't want to include. So I guess how we want to approach it is one thing we need to determine, maybe looking at some of the ones that have already been approved and haven't been challenged, and see how we want to approach it. And they all, he talked about the Basel area being something that we had put in our thing before. Don't hold me to this, but I think all of these required a tree plan for anything that was considered a protected tree. It had to be identified on a map showing its condition, its size, the species, its location on the ground, all had to be mapped out. And then if you were planning on removing some of them, you had to show how you were going to mitigate that by planting other trees on the same site, or a payment in lieu of contributing to tree fund for things to be planted elsewhere to replace what you took out. So most of these had that requirement rather than a basal area. And I did a lot of work in Libertyville, Illinois, which I think Ted had taken a look at their requirement also. And it was also, you had to do a tree plan, which John may know a little better. What would be the largest size unbuilt lot in Hopkinton at this point? Requiring a tree plan may not be a burden, because we don't have 200 or 300 acre lots that, the basal area might apply to better. So I guess we need to decide, how we want to control what we want to control, how we want to determine where that is, what we're actually taking a look at. So we have lots of questions to ponder and come up with some kind of way of approaching it. But we do have 5 examples of things that are on the books now that kind of address what we want to try to do. So I think it's going into them deciding, in these different areas, what do we want to try to specify, and moving forward from there.
I think when I look through the thing from the DCR from the state, a whole lot of the towns are focused primarily on trees along scenic ways and on publicly owned property. We already have restrictions on trees along scenic ways. I don't know that we're worried about trees on public property. I think that we're doing a pretty good job, our government, in protecting them. So, right, I think a lot of the towns that have built tree protection laws are looking to achieve something different from what we've talked about and what faces Hopkinton.
Yeah, because to me, one of the big draws of Hopkinton was its rural character, and you're not looking at just residence after residence. There's forested areas and wild areas. I think it has a lot to do with the amount of wetlands that are around. But right now, the only thing that's controlled is along scenic ways, on public land, and in wetland areas.
Yeah.
Outside of that, it's free for all. Whatever wants to be, whatever you want to take out, you can take out.
John, I'm curious, the knowledge that you have in your head always blows me away. Do you know roughly what our largest wooded, undeveloped, privately owned properties are in town?
No, I'm sure we have them somewhere. Off the top of my head, I don't know. We have some large parcels, though. I wouldn't be surprised if some of them are over 300 acres.
Hmm.
We could.
But whether they're developable or not is another question.
Right.
Yeah, I know there's a lot.
At minimum, there's going to be wetlands questions about a whole lot of the undeveloped land in town. But then I think there's other things too. All right, so let me pause for a second. Does anybody have any thoughts or corrections or additions to what we've said already as we restart this discussion? John, did I say anything that didn't ring true for what we did before? Did I miss any major bits?
You didn't miss anything. I would say that the subdivision, just for clarification on the subdivision that came in for Chestnut Street, that's a well-known loophole that a lot of developers use. When you file a subdivision plan, it freezes the zoning for 7 years. A lot of people use that in every town. So while it is a little underhanded, it's a tool that developers do tend to use. But they did not continue with it. They withdrew the application, so they are subject to the solar bylaw. So it worked out in the end. They're going to.
The owner of the land had a change of heart, right?
I think that's what I read.
I don't know.
It was either from public pressure or he himself saying, "Oh my gosh, is this what this means?" But one way or the other, I think the owner had a change of heart and change course.
They still plan on building the solar, so I don't know how much of a change of heart they had.
Oh, I don't know then. I don't know.
They'll have to shield it properly like we required in our zoning. So at least that we got that going for us.
At least that part will now kick in. So anybody else have thoughts? John came up with a proposal that is just a very sketchy idea. John, I'm going to ask you to share it with us, but I don't want people to think it's a fully formed idea. But before John does anyone else have thoughts, goals that we should have, things that we missed, things that we shouldn't do again? Does the Sustainable Green Committee, do you members have any thoughts on tree protection before we go forward?
Yeah, I mean, that was my hand. So yes, I love tree protection. But one thing I wanted to point out was that when it comes to solar specifically, the green goals for the town and the open space protection goals for the town are at odds. Because when you do the carbon math, it leans towards solar. Solar prevents more carbon from being emitted than the amount that the trees on that land typically will sequester in the same amount of time. So this is a constant battle. I read articles about it all the time and fights in various towns of what's the right thing to do. So we're not alone in these discussions. I struggle with it myself because I hate seeing these lots that are clear cut as well. I'd love to see more solar over parking lots and roads and places that are already developed. Right? I'd love to put some in my backyard, but I've had solar companies tell me my site isn't good for it unless I cut down a ton of my trees.
I think with the high school, or is it the middle school, but either the high school or middle school got approved for solar over one of the, and I would love to see our town do much more of that.
That's the middle school.
Yeah,
It was the high school bus lot as well.
I feel like,
Right.
as I remind myself and everyone else often, I'm just a high school history teacher. I'm not a business person. But I feel like a lot of the South Street businesses could probably earn money renting their roof space to solar development people. And that would produce more green energy and produce more money for the businesses that are over there. Put a bunch of solar on their roof. I mean,
The challenge is, Ted, with existing structures, is that the structural upgrades necessary to get the solar up there oftentimes wipe it out. So
That could
it's the new construction where we have the home run potential.
although there are a whole lot of parking lots over there too.
Yeah.
The parking lots, absolutely, but not the rooftop.
Yeah, no, that makes sense about, thus the specialized stretch code changing the way the places are constructed.
Yeah.
But the parking lots are there as well.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts before I ask John to share what his new idea is for a tree protection law?
Yeah, just an observation that
Sure.
based on the scenic law bylaws and the wetlands protection and the current maintenance of our public lands, I think most homeowners in Hopkinton do a terrific job of maintaining their trees. And, you know, what we've done from a screening standpoint for the solar, I think is really as strong as we're going to get in a lot of regards. So it's just, we have such a good percentage of open space in town that's preserved. I don't know, John, is it around 25% of our total space is open space? Do you know what the percentages are?
You all are asking me for details I don't know off the top of my head. You gotta give me heads up on that about these.
But I mean, that's the number that has been bandied about. And, you know, I think our open space protection bylaws and a lot of things have gotten us to a very enviable place. And at some point, we have to consider what extra regulation is doing to increase the cost and reduce the affordability of living in this community. And there, you know, I want to do everything I can personally, which is, you know, why I've got solar and I'm doing the things that I'm doing. But we have to try to balance a little bit the economics. And, you know, as a town, we're really coming up against some huge capital expenditure proposals that we're going to be wrestling with to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars. And at some point, as the cost of living here keeps going up, you know, empty nesters like me are going to be forced to move and open up my house to a family coming in with 2.7 kids, adding more onto it without any development. So we're making great progress as a country and as a community, but at some point, I think we have to just slow a little bit and make sure that we balance the economic costs and the affordability of this with the ultimate climate change goals.
It is a big, messy puzzle. There's no doubt about it. There are lots of pieces and lots of different directions that connect.
Yeah, and we could almost, rather than going in, you know, controlling on existing developments, maybe stay more focused on future work. And laying out a subdivision as a civil engineer, where the lot lines go can be varied to save, you know, move the building area away from this 30-inch oak and save it, rather than the way I've seen most of them, the whole site's bulldozed and then they come back and put some 3-inch trees here and there. You know, it would be nice if some consideration, you know, it may be that we just say, show us on your subdivision plan where every tree over 12 inches is, and maybe you justify why you need to tear down, you know, some of these specimen, you know, large, older growth trees. You know, I think where we stop is going to be one of the questions too, is, you know, I'm not sure I want somebody telling me I can't go out and cut down all these sassafrasses that are taking over my woods out here. You know, that are all 4 to 6 inch diameter. And
Ted, your idea of inviting some of the local developers to a session rather than just having a public hearing, invite people to come and give us some thoughts as we continue to develop this thing. So we get some direct input from the people that are more likely to be actually implementing these things.
Yeah. Which doesn't mean we have to build a law that they tell us to write, but I think it's important to make sure that they're included and we're thinking from their point. I think, Curtis, your comment might be a perfect segue to me asking John to share his thoughts. But I do have a quick question. Is sassafras a native species or is that invasive?
Seems invasive in the woods around me.
Because one of the things that struck me about that Illinois town is that they, and the tree protection that you showed me, is that they categorized trees by value, where the invasives had zero value and you didn't have to get any permission or you didn't have to contribute to the tree fund or anything if you're eliminating invasives. And that might be something to consider too, is as we move forward, making sure that we are protecting the native species, but inviting people to get rid of the invasives. That might be something to consider. Anyway, John, I would love it if you would share with us in any way you think is best what your newest first idea is for us to think about.
Sure. So I'll just say, I just Googled sassafras. It is native to Eastern North America.
Oh, well.
In Massachusetts.
It's got a little bit of value then, sorry.
And one of the things that comes up is a letter to the editor from Hopkinton Independent in March 6, 2023. Hopkinton home to special sassafras.
Oh, really?
So, don't know anything about it, but who knows?
Wow.
So I'll make this fast because I know that this group usually has a 9 p.m. stopping point, but we did start a little bit late. So I'll try and make it go fast. I guess I came up with this idea on my own, but hearing Curtis and talking to Kim, who is the conservation administrator, I don't know, maybe I heard it from somewhere else and just formulated into my own, but it's essentially similar to what Curtis was proposing with the other towns of limiting the amount of clearing on a site. If you do have to clear, replant to replace those trees or contribute to a tree bank. The wrinkles in mine are that you limit the clearing so that it doesn't affect single family homes unless they're doing large scale clearing. If they're just clearing a few trees on their property, no big deal. It's really meant for the industrial clearing, that type of thing. The stated goal would to be net zero tree loss in Hopkinton. And that kind of is the main focus of this. So if a developer cut down, and we could use basal area as a metric or diameter breast height as a metric, and certain number of trees, the tree plan that Curtis mentioned would probably be necessary to mark all those. So the developer, if they cleared a site, would need to replant the lost basal area or fund, based on a formula, an amount of money to this tree bank or bank account that can be a revolving account, so money can come in and money can go out. We speak to the 3 nurseries in town and try and set up a program, and this is all trying to keep it in Hopkinton. That's a theme of my idea, is keep everything in Hopkinton. So you talk to Hopkinton, Stone and Garden, Weston, and Angels, and if there's another nursery that I've left out, we can include them, and try and get a supply of native species trees that people can purchase using this tree bank. And the cost can be either offset 50, 75, or 100%. So private owners can buy trees. But basically it would be, the problem is when we have scenic roads and people cut down trees in the public right of way, we generally ask them to replant the trees in that right of way or on public land. We're running out of public land to plant trees. We just don't have enough. I think in certain, I want to say maybe in Chamberlain, when we had a scenic road, they were trying to do it on residents' property because DPW was like, we don't really have a place for these trees right now.
How is the beneficiary one of those, John?
Yeah, usually it's the cemeteries and those types of things, and you can only plant so many trees in those areas. So basically the idea is, if you can't plant the trees on the site to replace them, you contribute a certain amount, whatever the formula states, to this tree bank. And in order to keep the trees in Hopkinton, we allow Hopkinton residents to get these trees for a reduced cost and plant them on their private property. Because the trees that are getting cut would be caught under this bylaw would be on private property. They wouldn't be on public property. So you're essentially replacing trees cut on private property to trees planted on private property. And it's a lot of stuff that would need to get figured out, where these trees can come from, what species are covered, what's the cost, all that kind of stuff. But my thinking is, if we're going to be okay with cutting down large swaths of trees in Hopkinton, at least try and replace them in Hopkinton. The owner planting the trees on their property would have to, provide some kind of evidence that the tree that they purchased was planted in Hopkinton, and then they would get a rebate, or, however we could work the financial aspect of it. But the two goals are really no net tree loss, keep the trees in Hopkinton, and keep them on private property. So there's a lot that needs to be fleshed out, and it would probably end up looking a lot like some of these tree bylaws, like the one in Arlington. They're actually ones that have a formula based on diameter breast height of how much you'd have to pay into a tree bank for cutting those types of trees. And really just kind of flesh out the idea and see if it would work, if the nurseries would be happy to do that kind of stuff, or maybe DPW can have a supply, or however we can do it. But that's kind of where I'm thinking at this point.
Yeah, maybe even that you could ask for volunteers to, at no cost to them, the tree be planted if it's already paid for by the developer who, cut down all the trees somewhere else. That might be an option also.
Yep.
And there was one of the bylaws I looked at on single family developments. They only considered what was in the setbacks. What was in the actual building area was not controlled by the, if you were tearing down a house, or you had a single lot for a single family home, not a subdivision, that it only looked at what was in the actual zoning setbacks. Anything inside the building, allowed building area wasn't really controlled. So they were trying to keep a perimeter. So that could be another way to kind of keep the single family.
And another thing Kim and I were talking about is you've probably seen or heard some of the developers utilizing the DCR forest cutting permit to clear trees ahead of development. So in doing so, we would basically just be in touch with DCR and try and figure out what was on the site prior to the tree clearing, and then make some stipulation in the bylaw that if you get a forest cutting plan within 5 years of whatever tree clearing you're proposing, or development that you're proposing, we're going to have a 5-year look back to what was there before DCR issued the permit, and that's what we're going to base it off of. Don't know how well that would work, but that's kind of how we're trying to address that loophole.
Do you know if DCR requires any kind of quantification of what?
DCR is not a great communicator with us, so we don't really know. But
Curtis and I found that out when we were trying to get help with tree protection.
Yeah.
They didn't communicate well that way either. Okay. Any other thoughts on this for now?
I like the fact that we are giving incentives to actually adopt to good practices. So it really helps for somebody to see the rewards to vote for even a good law. So.
Yeah, there's been a lot of cases I would love to have had a tree planted on my property, but when I went and priced them, kind of negated that. So yeah, if they had some kind of program that you could say, yes, I would love to have a nice maple planted out here, if it came for free from the tree fund.
Yeah.
That way we could keep it in Hopkinton and the homeowners wouldn't have a real expense. It would all be borne by the developers. I like that idea.
So here's what I'll propose. I think that I will, if John, you're willing to work with John to try to turn this basic idea into something that looks a little bit more like a bylaw proposal for us to work on. Just looking at the faces in the room, there was a lot of nodding, and I think there were 2 thumbs up for John's proposal. So maybe that's a direction we'll move next, at least with some baby steps. And for our next meeting, whenever that is, hopefully we can have a little bit more semi-formal look to John's proposal that we can start to talk about. Along with that, I will reach out to some of the names that we've talked about before, invite them to the meeting, try to share ahead of time some of what we're talking about so that we don't run into that mistake again. I wonder if I could give some homework to somebody who is interested in the topic to maybe put together the purpose portion of that bylaw, to put it in a way that it's not simply aimed at solar development, that it has a bigger, kind of like what I read from Cambridge, or that fits with the town's vision statement. Is there anyone who would want to take on writing a paragraph or two of a purpose for this bylaw? I mean, some of the examples are 2 sentences. I liked the Cambridge one, delineating all the pieces, but I'm hoping someone will say, yeah, that'll be okay for me. There we go. Curtis, thank you very much.
I've got all these other bylaws printed out. I can
Awesome.
borrow from.
And I will try to work with John to turn his basic idea into something that might look a little bit more like a bylaw, if you think that's doable, John. Awesome.
Would you also like a copy of the older draft, the one that we were working on 2021? I found a copy on my laptop. I can send it to you. The last.
I would love a copy. I don't know if anyone else would. That's one of the things I asked John to send out to everyone, so we had a little bit more history to work with. But I don't know, John, if that's easy enough for you to do. If it's just an electronic copy, then people can delete it if they don't want it. But I kind of thought having the history of where we came from could be helpful to help people think through it.
Yeah, I can send that out tomorrow.
Okay. And then again, this bad boy, which is just coming off the website from the DCR. Anything else on this? It is after 9, but we did start late. Our last agenda item is, I think, and John, I think you said it's a quick update on MBTA communities, where we stand. Are we closer to having to start to take some concrete steps in a direction?
Yeah, so we've been working with the MHP's technical consultant to understand our compliance model. We realize we don't comply. We're just trying to figure out what the path to compliance would look like. So we've got some preliminary areas, and we're really going to start working on this bylaw in earnest, probably in end of July, early August, and work with the town manager's office to have a robust public input session, just so that people are aware, we can, assess what we're proposing. We did recently just get a model bylaw from DHCD, so we can use that to actually draft the bylaw, which this is what we've kind of been waiting for the whole time.
Mm-hmm.
So that's good. So we'll get started with that, and then I guess expect to see a bit more movement later this summer, and then certainly in the fall.
So when you say we, you're talking about you folks in town hall, not the zoning
Correct.
advisory committee, not at this stage?
So it's going to be people in town hall kind of using all the different venues to get input, but Zach is absolutely going to be probably the main channel of
Okay.
input.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you'll let us know, or you'll put it on the agenda, and you
Oh,
can
yeah.
let
I
me
think
know if I'm
we're
still
looking-
the chairperson at that point, what we need to be doing.
Yeah, so we're looking at Zach as being the main vehicle for this, because it's a zoning bylaw, so it's got to go
Okay.
to the planning board.
Okay.
But town manager has also talked about doing outreach through their office. So we'll see what that looks like, but trying to get public input where we can.
Okay, that sounds good.
Clarify in my mind, we are MTBA adjacent, so it doesn't have to be within the radius of the station.
Correct.
We're looking at overlay areas in town that we could specify for the higher density development.
Correct.
Okay.
However, there is a portion of land in the preliminary plans near the train station.
Oh, is there?
Is it Curtis's house?
Is that
Maybe.
All right, good. So
Game Torbonis, but yeah.
that'll be coming down the pike soon. We will have our hands full with that, it sounds like. Does anybody have anything else? Because we are at the end of the agenda at this point. I don't know that I want to nail down a date, because it is 9:10 now. but I would like to have another meeting in, say, a month. Is there a week that is especially bad for a bunch of people or especially good? I think a month gives us time to find a day if we know that people are. What do you guys think?
I am out of town all of July,
Okay,
if that helps find a date.
okay. So you would rather we start sometime in August for the next?
I mean, if you guys have to meet without me, I can catch up. I can watch the meeting on HCAM.
Our numbers are tight for a quorum, we learned tonight.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I have to
summertime.
watch the planning board meetings that I miss anyway, so I could watch the ZAC meeting too.
Okay. Can you pause for just a sec? I want to see if I can look at my family calendar. I know I'm home when the rest of my family goes to Cape Cod. Because I got to stay and hang with the dog. Let me see if that's on the family calendar, the Cape Cod trip. There it is. So I am absolutely required to be home the week of Sunday the 30th through Saturday the 5th of August. And that would work with Elisa's schedule. What do other folks think?
I'm available. I can join.
Yeah, I think the end of August, I'm supposed to be going somewhere. So
But beginning, you're okay?
yeah, beginning and middle.
All right. Ron, does that seem okay to you?
What day of the week are you looking at?
I think generally we do Mondays or Wednesdays. That's what we've been doing, right, John?
We've been doing Mondays, I think, which are better for me.
Okay.
The 31st.
When you say August, do you mean August 1st you're back or do you mean that week?
My flight back is July 31st.
Okay.
But if you guys do a meeting August 1st, I'm going to be very jet lagged.
All right. Well, John,
I might be here, but I might not be all there.
we just need you on the Zoom picture so that we have a quorum. You're welcome to sleep through it, I imagine, as long as your face is on the screen. So, John, maybe you could look at that and propose and grab a date.
So the 31st is the Monday.
And then the second would be.
Second is the Wednesday. And then
Are
the
both
week
of those
after,
available?
the week after, planning board has a meeting on Monday.
So both Monday and Wednesday are available on the town calendar?
On the 31st and on the 2nd, both of them are available.
Ron, can you do the second? No, you can't.
I'm up at Beach to Beacon Organizing Committee meeting
Okay.
that night in Cape Elizabeth.
We can't do a Tuesday.
Tuesday I could do.
I
Do you wanna-
I
let's
cannot do Tuesday. So you guys can meet without me, but I can't do Tuesday.
There's no way I'm meeting without you. I need you. And every other Tuesday is Conservation Commission. I don't know if that's a Conservation Commission or not.
The 8th is Conservation Commission.
Oh, so that Tuesday would be available. But if John can't make it, I don't want us to have a meeting. We all lean on him way too much. So, Elise, can you do that Monday jet lagged?
Well,
It's
Okay.
also possible.
and my flight gets in. I mean, I'm landing in Logan at 5:30 p.m. So the chances that I'm through customs and I have my bags and I'm home by 7 are very slim to none.
All right. Well, hopefully, one way or the other, we need Arnold.
We're also
Rachel.
missing
Rachel.
Mary and Rachel.
Right. Oh,
Yeah,
Mary, that's right. Mary is pretty reliable normally. Why don't,
Why don't you can you send an email or does it have to be decided?
maybe we do that. John, can you send an email to the whole group asking about those 2 days?
Yep.
And then we'll nail it down that way. All right. Anything else from anybody? Seeing nothing, I would love a motion to adjourn.
So move.
Second,
And there's a second roll call vote. Ted says yes. Let's adjourn. Ron,
Yes.
Madhu,
yes.
Elise,
Yes.
and Curtis.
Yes.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Sustainable Green Committee folks for coming.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone, for your patience, especially. That was a difficult first half hour. If John could have gotten the music on, it would have been a lot better.
Yes.
Learn
Sorry,
something.
you guys
about
were waiting
computers.
on me.
No, I'm glad you could make it at all, Elise. I don't mind waiting. All right, that's it. We're all done. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.